Welcome to the Soft Rebellion podcast, a homecoming to the creative power of your female body. Our world uproots us from the gifts of the feminine, the intuitive, the instinctual, the cyclical, the soft. What's the result? Patriarchal cultures of perfectionism, shame, and disconnect that leave us constantly running, never arriving. Imagine a world of women softly rebelling, claiming our cyclicity, our weirdness, and our rest as we courageously cultivate a deep and delicious relationship to our female bodies. My name is Florina. I'm an osteopath, dancer, writer, and coach. I've been on my own journey sparked by an eating disorder to come home to the wild, poetic anatomy of my female body and awaken my creative power. And I invite you to join me and my guests, trailblazing teachers, healers, and creatives, as we each reclaim our own soft rebellion. Hello and welcome back to the Soft Rebellion podcast. I'm so glad that you are here and I welcome you in the space of the Soft Rebellion. What's the story of women's bodies and what can the evolutionary biology of the female body teach us about our health, agency, and creative power? The functions of the female body have always been shrouded in mysteries and often myths and misconceptions. And as our understanding of our own anatomy and physiology evolves, we still have such big questions such as, why do women go through menopause? Why do we have periods unlike other mammals? What's the function of the female orgasm? Why are we in the midst of a fertility crisis? And why is reproductive choice a vital instinct? In this episode of the Soft Rebellion, the evolutionary biologist, author, and teacher Dr. Deena Emera joins me to explore exactly that, the mysteries of the female body through an evolutionary lens. Her research on the biology of pregnancy in mammals and the deep history of the female bodies reveals powerful insights into how we all can better understand and reclaim our innate feminine wisdom. Talking to Deena expanded what the soft rebellion means to me so much. Now I would say the soft rebellion is she who knows that her body is her own, she who knows its power, she who knows that reproductive choice is at the core of being a female mammal and a deeply ingrained and vital instinct. So this episode is for you if you are ready to let the ancient science and evolutionary biology of the female body change your view and experience of your own body and to follow its invitation to slow down in a world where we are caught in that struggle between our bodies and cultural evolution. And I would be excited and thrilled to hear from you how your view and experience has changed or got nudged or inspired listening to Deena and myself during this episode. So let's dive in and enjoy. Welcome on the podcast, Deena.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, me too. Morning on your end and cold wintry evening on mine. And I actually always like to start these conversations with a body check-in. And let me just ask you, how are you, Deena? How is your body? What is your body telling you today?
My body has had a hard week because I am getting over a cold. The fall, because I have 4 children, the fall is always a time of many colds. Kids are going back to school, and but I am almost back to 100%. So there's still some lingering congestion, but I got a great night's sleep last night. Sleep is so important for me, and it makes a
Mm.
difference between a great day and a terrible day. So I've had a few nights of really good sleep. So
Mm.
I'm feeling good and
Yeah.
yeah, ready to take on the day.
And a good moment to record a podcast episode. It's interesting. I actually come from a similar place. I've been really exhausted and then gave myself 3 nights with ridiculously long sleep. I just would surrender at 8 p.m. and sleep as long as my body needs. And
Yes.
today is day 8 of my cycle. So I also kind of emerge into my physiological energy again. And
Yes.
it fascinates me yeah, and we forget about this so almost silly, simple, and profound
Well, people are
things.
telling you all the time, get more
Mm-hmm.
sleep. It's something that you hear in the background, but I don't know how
Mm-hmm.
seriously people take it. And I think I know for me, just with,
Mm-hmm.
not, I'm not experimenting, but, just observations about my body when I haven't slept well versus
Mm-hmm.
when I have slept well. It makes an incredible difference. And you can just imagine if you're
Mm-hmm.
someone who doesn't sleep, who's sort of chronically deprived of sleep, I think that will takes a huge toll on the body and the
Mm-hmm.
mind. And I just
Yes.
wish that people, I talk to women all the time who know that they need to get
Mm-hmm.
more sleep, but they just can't make it happen. And, you know, it's easy to make recommendations.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is we live in this world and it just has so many demands of us.
Mm-hmm.
But I think sleep is so critical
Mm-hmm.
to feeling good in your body. I really do.
Yes. Yes, and that does bring us in the wonderful subject for today, the female body. And right in my little podcast intro, one thing I say is, yeah, for me, the soft rebellion is she who emerges into her rest because we are cyclical beings. We just can't be on 28 days a month, 24 hours every day. So, Deena, you are an evolutionary biologist, and within your book, A Brief History of the Female Body, you explore the mysteries of the female body through an evolutionary lens, which in itself, I feel this is your expression of soft rebellion. It's a niche, it's a very niche you have
Yes.
dedicated your life towards. And I would love to start. Take us back. What led you onto that path, and what led you into that niche and yet huge field of research?
I think part of it is, I mean, me landing in evolutionary
Mhm.
biology was not a coincidence. That was something that I was always fascinated by from when I was a child.
Mhm.
Trips to the zoo and noticing, the similarities and the differences between different animals. I think
Mhm.
really it started with looking at primates. I don't know if you've ever
Yes.
observed a gorilla or an orangutan or a chimpanzee, and you look at these cousins of ours and you see, you, you see in them that we're related. And I found, even though we're
Mhm.
also so very different. So I found that fascinating
Mhm.
at the level of, well, how did that happen?
Mhm.
I'm talking about long periods of evolutionary time. How did those differences happen? Um, sort of at the level of DNA and molecules.
Mhm.
So that's something that I've had a long interest in. And this bit, there was also just some luck, some serendipity. I ended up, when I decided I was going to continue my studies and get a PhD, I ended up in a lab that studied the female uterus. So it was,
Mhm.
in an evolutionary biology lab. Many of us are interested in processes, like I just said, how do these changes come about over long stretches of time? How
Mhm.
do animals start to look different from each other? Why do they sometimes remain looking similar to each other? All sorts of questions. But when you're asking those big questions, you need a system to study those questions. You can't
Mhm.
just, ask these broad questions without a way to test your
Yes.
hypotheses. And so the lab that I joined, and maybe it's not a coincidence. I mean, usually when you're getting your PhD in the biological sciences, you try out a number of different labs and you choose the one that's the best fit for a number of reasons, the personality of the
Mhm.
principal investigator of the lab, the size of the lab. There's just so many variables. But also, of course, the subject of the lab. What are they working on? So I ended up in a lab that was using the female endometrium, so, the lining of the uterus, as a model to study um, the evolution of novelty. So, very, very quickly, we were interested in how pregnancy first evolved in mammals. So, your listeners may or may not be aware
Mhm.
that the first mammals didn't didn't get pregnant. They laid eggs. And we know this because there still are some mammals that lay eggs. The platypus and the echidna are egg laying mammals. So they have a very different experience bringing new life into the world
Mhm.
than most mammals like ourselves, who basically carry a developing baby in their bodies. And that evolved, we think, for a number of different reasons. It's, safer for the baby is a great, you know, laying eggs is a strategy used by many animals, but once that baby is developing outside of the body, it becomes vulnerable to predation and very cold temperatures and whatnot. So that lab was interested in how did mammals go from laying eggs to carrying their babies inside their bodies and nourishing those babies from their own bodies. It's really remarkable. I mean, it was a huge innovation in mammals. And when you look at the mammals that lay eggs versus the mammals that have pregnancy,
Mhm.
there's 5,000 mammals that get pregnant, and there's a handful of mammals that lay eggs. So clearly it was a very successful strategy. So I ended up in that lab that was studying the evolution of pregnancy by studying the changes that had to happen in the uterus of the mother to enable that new intimate relationship between mother and baby that would allow a mom to start feeding her baby, feeding her developing baby from her own body. And that's really where the idea for this book started. I was in that lab learning just some mind blowing things about the female body, not just the human female body, but the mammalian female body.
Mhm.
And we're mammals. And this is something I think people don't appreciate is so many aspects of our biology are very ancient.
Mhm.
They have existed for hundreds of millions of years. And as I was learning these amazing things that, had never even occurred to me, I thought, wow, I think other women would want to know this.
Mhm.
Women who are not biologists, just women who are going through a pregnancy, or, a woman who has a monthly period and wants to know why does that happen. Um, and so I thought, oh, I should write a book about that.
Mhm.
And that was my goodness,
Mhm.
over a decade ago. Um, and I didn't have the opportunity. I didn't have the time. I was, working in the lab
Mhm.
and then working in another lab afterwards. And I was having babies, and, life was very busy. But it was really during COVID, I had this, it's during COVID and after my fourth child was born, and
Mhm.
took some time off, and I thought this would be a good time to write this book.
Mhm.
And so I did it. And of course, at that point, I had studied many more aspects of female biology, menstruation, pregnancy, of course. I'm now studying menopause. So I I had a good base for
Yeah.
writing this broad book about the female body and how and why it is the way it is in our species.
Mm. Wow, thank you. It's so it's so wonderful to listen to you. It feels like you're reading parts of your book, which I recommend everyone to. It's so interesting. I studied dance and osteopathy, anatomy, embryology. Embryology really, when I studied embryology, I thought, oh gosh, now I can start to understand the anatomy. And we need to know the story of how we came to be. And then reading your book open a whole other just so helpful lens to understand the immediate structure of my body. And
Yes,
I'm actually touched by how you say, yeah, aspects of our biology are so ancient. I find there is so much power in coming to realize that. And
absolutely.
yeah.
Um, and that's evolution for you. It's always
Mm-hmm.
building on something that already exists.
Mm-hmm.
And of course,
Mm-hmm.
we're all very different. All mammals are very different from each other, but
Mm-hmm.
there's this common base that we're built on. We all breastfeed our children.
Mm-hmm.
That was something the very first mammals were doing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a shared experience that we have with
Mm-hmm.
other mammals. Now, of course, maybe we do it a little
Mm-hmm.
differently. Our milk content is a little different from, a mouse's milk,
Mm-hmm.
so there's tweaking of this core biology. Um, but we're building on something, or our species was building on something that already existed. Um,
Absolutely.
and I do believe, and that's part of why I wrote the book, understanding that ancient history helps us understand our bodies better. Maybe there's a
Yes.
trait that is puzzling. Why does, why does X trait exist? Why does Y trait
Mm-hmm.
exist? But if you study the history and
Mm-hmm.
you try and understand, well, why did that trait emerge in the first place? And yes, maybe that trait isn't useful now, um, but we're building
Mm-hmm.
on what's already there. And it's very difficult to radically change
Mm-hmm.
an organism's physiology. So many traits remain from ancient times,
Mm-hmm.
because they were useful for an ancestor, and we are descendants of those ancestors, and so we inherited those traits as well.
Yes. I'm so glad that you say, yeah, it helps us to understand our own body better. And that's why I admire your work and why I find that it was a softly rebellious act to say, wow, I write that down so that other women can access that as well as a gateway to understand their own body better. And before we dive a bit deeper into that one theme we already teased about, how I'm very curious to hear now. So how did studying the female body in so much depth through that evolutionary lens, how did that change your own understanding of your own body, of health and disease? What happened in your own life? And yeah.
That's a great question. um I mean, I would say there's two categories, or two,
Mm,
areas where understanding the evolutionary history better has influenced the way I think about my own body. And so I would say the first is, as a mother, when I was going
mm,
through my pregnancies, when I was breastfeeding my children, as I am raising my children, I, there's this theory in evolutionary biology about motherhood and the relationship that mothers have with their offspring. And that theory is that, we evolved, there has to be cooperation between mother and child for a pregnancy to uh, be completed successfully. There has to be agreement. Okay, you're going to take some nutrients from me, and I'm going to provide a safe place for you, and the tissues are going to evolve to allow this complex physiology to happen. So there must be cooperation between mother and baby.
mm,
um, But what was fascinating to me to learn about as I was studying for my qualifying exams for my PhD, because that's really when I learned about this theory, is that there is also some underlying conflict between genes in mothers and genes in babies. And the reason this exists is because moms and babies are not genetically identical.
Mhm.
So, of course, a baby, about 50% of her genes come from her mother and 50% come from her father. And so there is a little bit of disagreement um, between the genes and in the mother and the genes in the baby, of course, and that derives from the father. Um, Disagreement about how much the mother should invest in this baby versus how much the mother should invest in the next baby, as an example. So I don't know how much we need to get into the details. My point
Mhm.
is learning about this. It's not just conflict, there's cooperation and conflict. And learning about this push and pull, this push and pull between mom and baby has been happening for hundreds of millions of years. And really, the arena where it plays out the most is during pregnancy, because there's this very intimate
Mm.
connection between mom and baby. The placenta of the baby
Yes.
is embedding itself in the uterus of the mother. And there's this very intimate connection. And so, because of that connection, there's this opportunity for this conflict and cooperation to play out between mom and baby. And so, much of our physiology reflects that conflict.
Mm.
Um, and there are many health problems that human females experience. And I believe that these um, diseases of pregnancy, like gestational
Mhm.
diabetes, like high blood pressure in the mother, they exist because of this underlying conflict that has existed
Mhm.
between mom and baby. And as a mother, and this conflict doesn't end after the baby is born. There is this continuing conflict. How much should the mother breastfeed the baby? How long should the mother breastfeed the baby? Mothers who have experienced, a really difficult time weaning their child. I believe that that reflects this conflict, again, that exists at the genetic level, um, and has been going on for, again, hundreds of millions of years, for as long
Mhm.
as we've been breastfeeding, mammals have been breastfeeding their offspring. And so, as a mother myself, my goodness, that gives me a little bit of perspective on,
Mm.
why breastfeeding may have been so difficult, why weaning may have been so difficult. Um, I mean, I won't promise, I
Mhm.
can't promise you that I've, drastically changed my parenting because of, this knowledge, but it has changed it a little bit. I
Mhm.
understand that the babies in our species that survived, they figured out how to manipulate the mothers in
Mhm.
their life, the fathers in their life, the aunts in their life. They evolved to be extremely
Mhm.
cute. They evolved to be extremely loud because the squeaky wheel gets the, what's the expression? The That's the early bird gets the worm is a different one. The squeaky wheel gets
I don't know
oiled.
that one
I can't.
actually.
I'm not thinking of the idiom.
Mm.
Anyway, so they are almost programmed to
Mm.
have certain behaviors because those behaviors allowed them to survive in past generations. And so, are they screaming because they are in terrible pain, or because they're starving, or because this is just a behavior that they have to get more attention? There's competition between siblings, as an example, Um, and so it just helps me keep some perspective as a mother. Um, I would say
Mhm.
the other area that I understanding the history has helped me understand my body better is in the realm of sort of health
Mhm.
and disease. And there is a whole, I don't know if I could describe it as a field, but there's this whole area of evolutionary biology called evolutionary medicine. And in evolutionary medicine, you're using evolutionary principles and theory and even experiments that we can do to basically better understand human health. So this is very specific to
Mhm.
humans. Um, understand why humans are susceptible to certain diseases, why um, what strategies might we use to improve our health. And you know a lot of that is understanding the context in which our bodies evolved, and then understanding that the context in which we live now is so removed from
Mhm.
that that historical
Mhm.
context in which we evolved. So humans for 95% of our history were hunter gatherers. We hunted, we gathered. Um, Sometimes there was plenty of food, sometimes there was very
Mhm.
little food. And so you take a body that evolved in that context, and bodies don't evolve very quickly. That's the thing. That's one of the main ideas in sort of evolutionary medicine. Bodies evolve very slowly, but culture evolves very quickly. And so human culture, especially in the last few hundred years, has just changed so dramatically, where, in many human societies, there's so much food available. Um, and, but our bodies evolved to store extra energy as fat because you don't know when your next meal is coming. So our bodies got very good at storing any extra calories that you were getting as fat. Now, that causes problems for humans
Mhm.
because we eat too much. We eat too much and we don't move enough, right? That's another component of this
Mhm.
is our ancestors were constantly moving. They weren't sitting at computer screens. Um, they weren't, they were active. I mean, they expended most of their energy looking for food. Um, And so, even if we aren't eating more than our ancestors, even if we're consuming the same number of calories, we aren't burning those calories the way that our
Mhm.
ancestors were. So, this causes a lot of health problems in humans now. This mismatch between the way our bodies evolved and the lifestyles that
Yes.
we have now. And and it's more than just that. Our brains also evolved to be attracted to certain foods, as an example, certain activities. Um, because I talk about this in my book very briefly, um, because that rarely encountered berry or fruit
Mhm.
was so nutritious. I mean, sugar, was not something that, we ate very frequently. Our ancestors ate very frequently. Um, you know, Carbohydrates have a lot of energy. Sugar tastes wonderful because our brains evolved to be attracted to that type of um, calorie, right? To get our calories from,
Mhm.
something with sugar in it, and many other benefits of fruits. Um, but we encountered that sweet fruit so rarely compared to how abundant the pastries, the ice cream, all
Mhm.
of the sweet foods that exist now. Um, our brains think they taste wonderful, and they're so abundant, and so we just indulge. And everyone knows that one of my children, not all of them, but one of my children, he just has an addiction to sugar.
Mhm. Mhm.
um, and that, I believe, is something that we inherit from those ancestors
Yes.
that evolved that attraction for a reason. It was good for them to seek
Yeah.
out sweet fruits. Um, Unfortunately, it's a liability for us now. The way that our brains are attracted um, to sweets
Mm.
and to fat
Yeah.
and to salts. I mean, salts is very important. Um, it's just that now there's so much of it. It tastes delicious because,
Mhm.
you know, it is very important in our physiology, salts, but too much of it is not good. But we have a taste for it because it was something that our ancestors needed to seek out in their diets.
Wow. Thank you so much. Again, it's always, I could just listen to you and listen to you, keep listening. It's a topic I so
Oh,
enjoy.
thank you.
It's a joy to record this episode. It's interesting, the 2 points you highlighted, which the first thing with motherhood, what's there kind of struck me was, or what I really heard was, it gave you an understanding, even if it didn't directly change your actions or if it directly changes what we now tell our child, but it gives us this really profound understanding, which is so empowering. Also, I'm not yet mom, but I
Absolutely.
imagine to see, wow, this is actually nature. I'm not wrong. My child is not wrong. I imagine it brings also almost also, I don't know, a sense of lightness because, or
Mm.
it's empowering. That's what I wanted to
It's
say.
empowering, and I
Mm-hmm.
think the what I didn't say when
Mm-hmm.
I was
Mm-hmm.
talking about that is I have less guilt. I mean, you
Yes.
say that you're not a mother.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
modern motherhood is
Mm-hmm.
tied to so much
Mm-hmm.
guilt about what we are doing wrong, what we aren't doing,
Mm-hmm.
and I feel that I have less guilt because I have that
Yes.
understanding. The same thing is true on the health side.
Mm-hmm.
I understand that my body evolved to
Mm-hmm.
love sugar and to love salts.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that those things are bad for my body. And so when I have a moment of weakness, I guess I feel less guilty about it. I understand why it is
Mm-hmm.
such a struggle for so many of us.
Mm.
Um, it allows me to be more forgiving of
Yes.
myself um,
Mm.
in the
Yeah,
way
I
that
think, no, go
yeah,
on.
go. No, no,
I
go
think
ahead.
it's wonderful. Like that's what I think that's what I meant. That's a way better word, but that's what I meant with lightness. Exactly. I feel less guilt. I feel less shame.
Yes,
And then we are in this, oh, this is the big theme, what I think we all women together have to do to de-shame and de-guilt many things, right? And it's
absolutely.
just so fascinating, Dina, to, interview so many different people, and there are so many different lenses we can go ahead and do that, and we all contribute. And it's just so fascinating to hear through this very, and I'll say, scientific, evolutionary, evidence-based lens, but that
Yes.
in the big picture is also a move of de-shaming, de-guilting. Is that a word?
Yes,
Wow. And the other thing which I really thought, wow, my gosh, yeah, of course, right? The body evolves slower than our culture. And on this podcast, I talk a lot. That's really my researchers turning into my PhD soon. It's the cyclical body. And what did it's so simple, but to really just acknowledge that, wow, yes, I don't need to be able to run with the speed of our culture because my body did and still is evolving slower. It's in a different place where
absolutely.
the rest of the world is.
Absolutely. I think slowing down, I mean, every person is their own person and
Mm-hmm.
faces their own struggles, but I do believe that because of this mismatch
Mm-hmm.
between, our current lifestyles and the way that our bodies evolved, I do think slowing down, and it's so difficult to do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because this is the world that we live in. But, you
Mm-hmm.
know, for women who struggle, um, going back to sleep as an example, I mean,
Yes.
you just can imagine how much more sleep our ancestors got.
Mhm.
Um, and if there's just, some small
Mhm.
changes that we can make, acknowledging, understanding what our bodies are expecting, what they need.
Mhm.
Of course, we can't become hunter gatherer. I mean, that's not going to happen. So we have to acknowledge the world that we live in. But if there are small
Yes.
things that we can do
Mhm.
to give our bodies more of what they're
Mhm.
expecting,
Mhm.
I think that can make a big difference. And I am someone who, independent of my science degrees and, what I study, I'm just someone who naturally is very, what's the right word? I don't like intervention. I don't like
Mhm.
pharmacological intervention if I can avoid it. If I need something,
Mhm.
okay, I have, as an example, I have an um
Mhm.
it's called, it's not Crohn's disease, but it's,
Mhm.
a bowel
Autoimmune.
issue,
Mhm.
inflammation of the bowel, and I take medication for that because when I don't, my life becomes unmanageable. I'm sure
Mhm.
that there are lifestyle changes that I could make. I never was able to figure out what those changes were. I tried. And so I take medication for that. But in general, I prefer to try and change lifestyle to, fix
Mhm.
some of the problems that I am having more and more problems with my body as I'm
Mhm.
in my 40s, I am in perimenopause. Our bodies do change. Um, but I, I think many of those changes, again, should, as much as we can, we should be trying to replicate, those
Yes.
environmental conditions that our
Mhm.
bodies are expecting.
Mhm.
Lots of sleep, lots of movement,
Mhm.
lots of sunshine. I mean, I have light skin and, I'm told to stay out of the sun, but just something simple as being
Mhm.
out in the sun makes me feel so good. And
Mhm.
I think there's a
Mhm.
reason for that. And, I have very low vitamin D levels
Mhm.
because, and I think this is a common problem among women. We
Mhm.
don't spend enough time in the sunshine. You need that sun exposure to
Yes.
synthesize vitamin D. And vitamin D is an incredibly important hormone that affects so many aspects of our physiology. And so I can't remember why I went off on that tangent, but I think, you know, changing our lifestyle as much as we
Mhm.
can, I believe, can make a huge difference in how we're feeling in
Yes.
our bodies.
Yeah. Yeah, I was look when we in our little pre-talk, you mentioned just you teased how it changed your view on interventions and the least possible. And I was looking, so yeah, now you allude on
I
that.
touched on
It's
that.
absolutely, yeah. And I think, that's already such a wonderful take-home message for everyone. My teacher always talks about the 1% rule, and I use that with all my patients in clinic. And it's so, yes, we can't suddenly go to maybe yoga or gym every day, but what is the 1% I can contribute towards my sleep, if it's in length or quality, or what is the 1% in movement? And I know that there is something magical about this 1% rule, that it just keeps amplifying itself, because of course the body finds its natural momentum. It's gonna drag us more and more into that direction.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
yeah. Mm. Deena, we talked about shame and guilt and lightness and motherhood, and one more or less recent, open article you have published and written was about the reproductive choice, and that reproductive choice is at the core of being a female mammal. And yeah, this when I've read the article, when we talked about it together before, there was an immediate, oh yes, I would love to talk about that if you still have time.
Yeah, yeah, of
Good.
course.
Um, And I was really, really, really re-inspired when I read that article early this morning, actually. And it reminded me last week, I suddenly was sitting with that mantra, my body is my own and I know its power. I really had a tough week and suddenly I just thought, okay, that's okay. If I don't know anything, I'm gonna go on. That's what I know. I know that my body's my own. And I, even if I don't know what precisely power means, I know that I know its power.
Mm,
Somehow that came again. And that's a softly rebellious
mm,
act to say that. And
absolutely.
yeah, you talk about reproductive choice and how this is a really deeply ingrained and vital instinct for all female mammals. And
Mm.
maybe that's the moment where I give it over to
Yeah, of
you.
course.
Take us onto this journey.
Um, so that article I wrote, I don't know where your listeners are located, but in the
Mainly
U
UK.
in the UK. So
Mm,
um, a couple of years ago, so you may or may not be familiar with American politics
mm,
and legal issues, but that article was inspired by the overturning in the U.S. of Roe v. Wade. So, you know, there was women across the United States before this overturning were legally allowed to have an abortion. And when that was overturned a couple of years ago, that decision was then sent to the states. So individual states in the US could either ban abortion or allow abortion or, set their restrictions. And this was a big deal here. Um, you know, it's if you've read the news, women
mm,
across the country in places where abortion is now illegal, are having a horrible time accessing care for their
mm,
bodies. And care, providers, medical providers in many states are not even willing to, care for many women
mm,
who need urgent medical care because these laws have changed in their states. And this isn't just women having who want to have an abortion, but women who are having an acute issue. Maybe they're having a miscarriage. Maybe any number of things. They're being denied care, and this overturning really fired many women in the
mm,
U.S. up. Um, it's it's not right, it's not fair. I mean,
mhm,
these are
mm,
political
yeah,
views,
yeah.
and I'm sorry to get into that, but and I am someone who I have been faced with the question of
Mhm,
whether or not to have an abortion, and I've always chosen not to. So it's actually a decision that, sorry for getting so personal, but it's a decision that
mm,
I would have a very
mhm,
difficult time making myself,
mhm.
the choice of, terminating a pregnancy. But at the end of the day, it's my body and it's my
Yes,
choice.
yes.
And
Mhm,
I and many women in this country feel very strongly that that is a choice that the government should not get
mhm,
involved in. And so, many of us became very active after the overturning, and collectively organizing, and I felt that one contribution I could make would be to write this article.
mm,
And because it was a perspective that most people don't have. They don't understand. um, well, they're not biologists, so it's sort of a niche topic and something that most people don't know much about. But I just wanted to contribute sort of this unique
mhm,
perspective to
mhm,
this debate, because one pieces of the logic of this overturning, the Supreme Court overturning this law, is that abortion was not deeply embedded in the history of this country.
mhm,
And that was a line in the article. reproductive choices is one of the most deeply ingrained um, sort of aspects of our
Mm-hmm.
physiology. People don't realize that. And so I talk about, different examples in this article. And, so I can tell you a little bit about you and your listeners about that now.
Yes, please.
Um, female mammals, the ones who were successful in the past, um, were the ones who passed on more genes to more offspring. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, this is just basic evolutionary biology. The successful females passed on more of their genes, and the there's many different aspects of reproduction that would enable reproduction to be successful.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's, choosing a male. So that's in many species, that's an active choice where you're choosing one male over another. And in many mammalian species, females are actively or trying to choose. I mean, of course, males are trying to thwart these choices, but
Mm-hmm.
females are actively trying to choose, the male who they think is going to produce the healthiest offspring,
Yes.
or the offspring most likely to be successful in having their own children later on. So they have certain qualities. Maybe they have the brightest red feathers, or whatever it is. We're making these choices based on lots of different criteria, and it depends on the species. So we're making choices, all mammals. We're making choices about our mates. Our at a more physiological level, we're making choices about which egg to
Yes.
ovulate. We're making
Mm-hmm.
choices about which embryos to allow to implant in our uterus. So, this is something that I've studied myself, and people don't realize this, but the uterus of the female mammal, and this includes humans, is actively engaging with the embryo as it's trying to implant. And our uterus has evolved this exquisite um, quality control mechanisms. It's able to sense the quality of the embryo.
Mm-hmm.
And if the quality of the embryo doesn't pass a certain threshold, it prevents that embryo from implanting in the uterus. And, the embryo is lost. I mean, most human pregnancies are lost.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the reason is because of this mechanism that we have of screening through. So, why would we do that? We do that because, and this is true of all female mammals, it's especially true of primates, and it's especially true of humans. We invest so much time and energy into reproduction. A long pregnancy, a long period of lactation and caregiving. This is so much energy and so much time. And so our bodies have evolved many ways of trying to invest that energy and
Mm-hmm.
that time in offspring that have the highest chance of
Mm-hmm.
making it. And so, that embryo, going back to the example of the uterus, actively choosing which embryos to allow it to implant. If it didn't have the ability to do that, the embryo would implant and it would probably
Mm-hmm.
grow for some amount of time. But because the embryo is of low quality, it's got chromosomal problems, it's got developmental problems, whatever problems it might have, it probably won't be born. Or if it's born, it probably won't make it to childhood. And so our bodies want to cut our losses as early as possible. If we think that this baby won't make it, let's let's prevent that baby from
Mm-hmm.
taking those resources from us as early as possible, and investing in the next baby. These are very critical decisions
Mm-hmm.
that mammals
Mm-hmm.
make. Um, And there are others, so many others, and you see this across mammals. And of course, it's not exactly the same mechanisms and the same types of choices that different mammals are making.
Mhm.
But this, when you look across mammals, this is a core feature of our
Yes.
biology, are these choices that
Mhm.
we make as mothers and as females. Who are we going to mate with? When are we
Mhm.
going to mate? When are we going to start reproduction? Because if we start too early, so in other words, when are we going to go through puberty? If we start too early, maybe our bodies aren't ready, and we're going to, we're not finished growing, or we're not, we don't have enough body fat to allow our bodies won't be able to carry a pregnancy to term. Um, so when we start reproducing, who we reproduce with,
Mhm.
which eggs should we be ovulating? Because we lose millions of eggs um, before they're ever even
Yes.
ovulated. So which eggs are the highest quality? Which embryos are um, have the highest chance of making it? In some species, there's a choice about which children, which offspring to invest most resources in. In many species, it's the
Mhm.
strongest babies.
Mhm.
You know, that this is especially true in animals that have large litters. You have to make choices about which babies you're going to invest your resources in, because there are limited resources. Mothers can't invest everything
Mhm.
um, in their children. They have to save something for themselves so that they can continue living and can continue having children. Because again, and this is all, from the evolutionary perspective, the mothers that did the best in the past were the ones who were most successful. Not necessarily the ones who had the most babies, but the ones who had the most babies survive and reproduce themselves. And so we have all these mechanisms in place um, for choice, you
Mhm.
know, the choice of when, who, which embryos. And I feel that
Mhm.
the, this modern choice that was just taken away from us at the federal level, this is just, you know,
Mhm.
um, the modern sort of manifestation of this ancient thing that our bodies
Mhm.
and our minds are constantly doing. So it's taking away this very natural, um, sort of elemental
Yes.
aspect of who we are
Mhm.
as
My
female mammals.
birthright. Yeah.
Yes.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and females in nature just don't do
Mhm.
it. If they
Mhm.
can't
Mhm.
carry a baby to term, they have a
Mhm.
spontaneous abortion. If the conditions aren't perfect, if there isn't enough food, they are aborting their babies
Mhm.
spontaneously. It's not a
Mhm.
conscious choice.
Mhm.
but I don't think that is, I don't think it's that different. I mean,
Mhm.
the core logic is the same. It's if we are not able to take care of
Mhm.
offspring for whatever reason,
Mhm.
um, these choices are built into our physiology. And this is,
Yes.
these modern reproductive choices that we, have the ability to make. It's just an extension
Mhm.
of
Mhm.
something that's very ancient and sort of deeply
Mhm.
ingrained in our biology.
Mhm. Yeah, and we had choice before humans thought arose to judge that choice, right? In the end, there were in the
Yes.
back in the ancient times there was no judging of, oh, I should
No.
or I shouldn't, or I'm now, that means I'm bad, I'm not fitting this societal norm, or that this expectation, that expectation.
Yes.
Um, yeah. Wow, thank you so much. It's I remember that moment in my undergrads when we learned about how actually most pregnancies would actually get terminated naturally, which at that point we were like, oh, really? I thought it was a bit,
Yeah,
we all thought it was just for granted. And it really struck me again when you talked about how our uterus has this incredible ability to sense, how that's such a specialized tissue and such a
yes,
sensory tissue, which it's amazing to hear because I know in menstrual cycle awareness we talk a lot about reclaiming the central body, and it can all sound a bit woo-woo and fa-fa and spiritual, but actually, again, it's like, no, it's like it's in our biology.
totally. It
Mm-hmm.
absolutely is.
Mm-hmm.
And not just in our biology. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
these are
Yeah.
ancient
Mm-hmm.
traits.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah, and the other thing, right? Just that, yeah, to acknowledge and dare to ask what is best long term for mother, not just for fetus or embryo. What is what is best for mother?
What is
What
best for
is
mother?
best for that female body, and then her whole units and circles which that carries out. Hmm.
Absolutely.
Now I'm getting political out of pure. Now I'm very curious. When you published that article, what was the immediate reaction, or
Oh
how was
gosh.
that received?
Lots of negative comments.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, well, I think most like-minded women, maybe they're not
Mm-hmm.
biologists, I think they were just amazed and fascinated
Mm-hmm.
and,
Mm-hmm.
but I think, I mean, you know how modern politics is,
Yeah.
everything you read is in the lens of what you already believe. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, and in the article, I try not to dive into the politics and I just stick
Mm-hmm.
to the
Yes.
facts of biology. And I make the argument simply that
Mm-hmm.
this is not, the desire and the need to be able to make these choices is not just, this modern whim of human females, but just something that is very deeply embedded
Mm-hmm.
in who we are
Mm-hmm.
as mammals.
Mm-hmm.
That was the point,
Yes.
but many people,
Mm-hmm.
um, I don't want to say many, the people who caught this article was in the Boston Globe and, um, you know, people make comments at the end of articles and,
Mm-hmm.
many people are like, oh, wow, this is incredible. And others are like, I thought this was parody. I didn't understand, is
Mm-hmm.
this a joke?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, as you would expect.
Mm. Yeah.
Everyone's
But yeah,
carrying.
it is such a it's such a it's a beautiful article, and it's so everyone can understand it, right? I will put the link into the show notes as well as to the book. And actually on your webpage there listeners can also find more links. Some of them are a bit more complex, but we still enjoyable.
Yes.
I enjoyed the one about the
Yes.
evolutionary lens of the menstruation. Yeah, but what did I want to say? Yeah, it's just it's a good, and it's an important read. That's what I would say. And for me, definitely, again, also now when I hear you talk about it, it's interesting. It takes kind of shame and guilt, even though I haven't gone through the experience myself, but we are connected, right? And we feel these
Absolutely.
collective wounds as women. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Wow, we went the full circle. And
Mm-hmm.
it's been so re-inspiring for me, and I know that it will, well, doch, I know, therefore it will be for my listeners too. Hmm. Thank you so much, Deena, for all your time, for talking to me and
My
us.
pleasure. I loved being here. I loved our conversation. I
Mm-hmm.
hope your listeners and learn something new
Mm-hmm.
and enjoy learning a little bit more about their bodies. And my book is available for anyone who wants to go deeper. I do go much deeper into a lot of different topics. Some of the topics that we talked about today, but many others. If you want to learn about the female orgasm, if you want to learn about your breasts, the mammary glands, so many different topics that I cover for those who are biologically curious about your body.
Thank you, Dr. Deena Emera, for being with us. And thank you, dear listener, for being with us and me too. By sharing these conversations with you, I'm leaning into my calling, my own soft rebellion. And it's such a blessing to be creating a platform of resources and inspirations to come home to the creative power of our female body. I would love, and I really mean it, I always love to hear your takeaways on how this conversation was for you. You can always tag me on social media at florina.tali, or you can directly send me an email. That would be softrebellion@florinatali.com. I would love to hear from you, who you would like me to be talking to, what topics you would like to be explored. I really want this to be a conversation. And if you know anyone who you think, wow, this episode would just be for her, then do forward this episode to them. Share it with all your families and friends. And also, if you did enjoy this episode and do enjoy this podcast, do leave a review, give us a follow. This helps me hugely to spread the soft rebellion in the world. I will be with you next week with a solo episode in which I share how the soft rebellion has been showing up in my life at this very moment and what have been the gifts which I was harvesting. And until then, go and be your unique and weird, wonderful self. Lots and lots of love.